Right, so here we go for our latest podcast. Welcome if you're joining us, well, not welcome if you're not joining us, I suppose, because you wouldn't be watching it, would you? That's a bit of a stupid thing to say, really. That's a good start, isn't it? But it's me, Nick, again, and
Hello.
our apologies first of all for viewers because we had the suggestion that we should do a Christmas one, in a pub by a nice roaring fire, and we did make attempts, didn't we, Nick, to
We did, yeah,
to
and
try and organise that. It didn't quite happen.
no, 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 never quite happened. But
It didn't.
next year, yes, or next Christmas this
Next
year to
Christmas,
look
yeah, this
forward to. We
Christmas this
will,
year. We'll book it
absolutely,
in advance and make
yeah,
sure it happens. Or maybe we
yeah.
should do a pre-recorded one in summer where we can just fake it and just kind of like have Christmas decorations in the back of a
Oh,
fireplace, something like that, and
that's the
do it
way
that
the
way,
pros
and
do
then put
it.
it
I'm
out at
sure,
Christmas.
isn't it? Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
living in a post-truth world. There's no problem with doing that. I
Indeed,
don't think
yeah.
these days.
No, quite
Well, we
happy
won't get
to. That'd
political,
be great.
but we will talk books. So the aim today that Nick and I thought we would do is the actual intention of these podcasts, which is basically to throw a book at each other effectively and say why you should, or in some cases might be why you should not buy this book or read it more accurately read this book. And I think we've both got ones that we want to say, oh yeah, you definitely should read this book, buy and read this book. And we're just going to do a little kind of tete-a-tete talking through these things and persuading each other why we should and why it might be of interest. So I'm going to stop talking and hand it straight over to you, Nick, to tell us your chosen book for today.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I'm right. I'm going to pitch to you the idea that you really must read a book called Solaris by the Polish science fiction writer Stanislaw Lem. And you might think, oh, science fiction, not my thing. Don't want to do that. Let me explain why this book is marvelous and like very few others. The first thing to say is that it some books occasionally, now and then, will come along and transcend the genre in which they are written. Solaris doesn't so much transcend the genre of science fiction as contain within itself multitudes of other genres. It's not just science fiction, it's a detective story, it's a ghost story, it's a political satire, it's a heartbreaking love story. I'll come to how these ideas develop in a while, but here's the basic facts. Stanislaw Lem, 1921 to 2006. He published Solaris in 1961 at the height of the Cold War, and there are a lot of, and you can see in it a lot of political stuff. Let's leave that to one side for the moment, because this is going to take us on a journey not just through multiple genres and different sorts of writing, but into really interesting the wider effect of this novel on our popular culture. Let me take you on a journey that will include highlights such as George Clooney, Vivienne Westwood, and the Sex Pistols. We'll come back to them in a moment.
I won't let you
Let,
forget.
absolutely. Right. Solaris by Stanislaw Lem, science fiction. Um, Before the beginning of the novel, years previously, mankind has made contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Forget about little green men and Zarkon, the ruler of the universe, and all that sort of thing. This is extraterrestrial intelligence as it has never been imagined before. Humanity has encountered a planet that is sentient and living and intelligent. And immediately, this is really important in the book, you aren't dealing with a version of human psychology or a psychology that is in any way permeable. And mankind has been trying to understand and come to terms with and experiment upon Solaris for decades. Um, Shortly before the beginning of the novel, one of these experiments goes horribly wrong, and a distress signal is received from the orbiting space station, which is humanity's scientific outpost for investigating the weirdness of this planet. Um, astronaut and psychologist Chris Kelvin is dispatched to investigate, and the novel concerns what he finds on board the space station. He finds a scene of absolute terror and horror. The crew are cowering in their cabins, locked away, because they are being haunted by simulacra, representations, artificial creatures that the planet has drawn up from their deepest, wildest, and most profound hopes and fears. And you suddenly find, oh, we're in a ghost story and we're in a detective story, because Kelvin has to work out what is going on here and how this is happening, and effectively free them from the position they're in. And of course, inevitably, Kelvin falls prey to Solaris himself.
Mm.
And he wakes up in his cabin to find lying next to him what he is convinced is his former wife, who died, committed suicide 10 years previously. And this adds an unmanageably difficult problem to the quest that he is on to save and free his companions on board this. And at the same time, he finds himself falling in love with
Mm.
a woman that he knows isn't real.
Mm.
And worse than that, he finds himself compelled to reenact and replay the at times utterly wonderful, at times utterly dysfunctional and dreadful relationship that led to her suicide, and the mess that he has been carrying around in his own psychology for the last 10 years. And it is the intelligent planet that is doing this to him. I'm not going to do too many spoilers, but the
Mm.
second half of the book is effectively the business of how he works out what he needs to do to liberate the crew and himself from this dreadful reenactment in effectively a mirror world of hell that is that he finds playing out around him and that he cannot escape from. So what you've got here is something that is way beyond any conventional notion, I think, of what science fiction does. Some science fiction enthusiasts may well take issue with that and say, actually, science fiction is the great liberating genre that allows you to do so many different things and address
Mm.
so many
Mm.
different issues. I wouldn't quarrel with that. I think in this book, Lem does it better than I've ever encountered anywhere else or ever done. And it's got so much in it. You know, there are echoes of Odysseus and his companions. In the island of the Lotus Eaters, or in the cave of Polyphemus, grappling with phantoms that may have the ability to destroy them. I won't actually do spoilers, as I said, but
Yeah,
the
sure.
the ending is simultaneously heartbreaking and deeply puzzling and weird, and it leaves you questioning everything that you've read for the previous 240 pages or
Mm.
thereabouts. There are many, many deeply pleasurable diversions as we go. There's a long excursus on the history of humanity's attempt to formalize its knowledge and understanding of Solaris, which it beats anything that Flann O'Brien does with his lunatic scientist De Selby in books like The Third Policeman into a cocked hat. It tended during the Cold War. This period, this passage tended to be read as a satire on Marxism and Soviet thought. I think it's actually much more profound than that. I think one of the marks of a truly great book is that every age that re-encounters it brings or brings to it new issues and concerns and takes from it new meanings and new interpretations. And I think anybody concerned about artificial intelligence and about the reality that is mediated to us through social media or through software will find some profound and probably quite scary things in this book about how the humans on board the spacecraft interact with and react to the simulacra that are placed in front of them, that are interacting with them. So all those are all great reasons for wanting to read Solaris.
Yeah,
Let me
definitely.
just do a brief excursus on the influence it's had on our culture, because it's actually been surprisingly profound for a work of science fiction that's now over 60 years old, from the time of the Cold War and the other Europe. It's been filmed 3 times. First of all, by Soviet television in the 1960s, and there is in fact a copy of that film lurking around on YouTube if you care to go looking for it. It was also filmed more famously by the great Russian cinema director Andrei Tarkovsky in the early 70s. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because there's some really interesting stuff associated with that. More famously, I think it was filmed by Steven Soderbergh, the man who did Sex, Lies and Videotape, in 2002 with George Clooney. And as with both of the other films, Soderbergh focuses upon the romance and the love story and the relationship that repeatedly goes horribly, horribly wrong. Clooney is absolutely brilliant. The film is shot in richly luminous blues and browns, and it is an absolutely mesmerizing experience. Tarkovsky's film, which was made in 1972, is a whole other thing. It does a very straight account of the Kelvin experience on the spacecraft, and the and the love story with the simulacra of his ex-wife. But there's another really interesting thing about it. Filmed in 1972, and when Kelvin goes up to the space station, Tarkovsky's longtime wardrobe mistress, Nellie Fearman, who worked on a lot of his films, gave Chris Kelvin a really interesting astronaut suit: leather jacket, string vest, and drainpipe trousers. And you think, oh, how very punk is that? And then you think again, hang on, this is the Soviet Union in 1972. That's half a decade before punk happened in Britain. And here's an interesting byway. John Savage, in his magisterial account of the rise and fall of the Sex Pistols, a book called England's Dreaming, which I would urge everybody with an interest in popular culture to read, has unearthed the nugget that Tarkovsky's film had a very difficult relationship with the Soviet censors and was only released in the West in 1976. And he's unearthed the nugget that Malcolm McLaren took Vivienne Westwood and the Sex Pistols to see an early screening of Tarkovsky's version of Solaris in London, in a cinema in St. Martin's Lane, in November 1976. Vivienne Westwood was there. And lo and behold, this is just when the Sex Pistols are on the verge of their cultural breakout and becoming the biggest thing since the Beatles. Lo and behold, 3 months later, after seeing this film, the Sex Pistols are cavorting around the music business, wearing leather jackets, string vests, and drainpipe trousers. The prosecution rests its case. I think Tarkovsky's film has had an absolutely breathtakingly deep, but generally unknown and unacknowledged effect via the work of Westwood on our notion of fashion and style and how we think of how we present ourselves and how we present ourselves has a lot to do with how we interact with simulacra, or what the idea of what is real and how we invent ourselves socially. So that's another really great reason for wanting to read Solaris, because its tentacles stretch out into our culture and our knowledge and our understanding of the world in a really, really interesting and unexpected way. So go and read
Oh,
Solaris,
really?
Ken. You'll
It
love
does
it.
sound very good, and I suspect I might well go for the George Clooney movie version of it, just to kind of like squeeze myself in gently into the general kind of area of it. But it does
Mm-hmm.
sound very interesting, and in a sense, I mean, like it does sound something very much a product of the 1960s. So I think it was the
Yes.
1961. I
Yes.
think you said to when it was
61 it was published.
it was
Yeah.
published, yeah, and
Yeah.
does have that feel. I mean, I've said it. I think I may have said it in one of the podcasts before that science fiction allows you to explore what it means to be human, to explore
Yeah.
what humanity is, as well as to be put into kind of Sherlock Holmesian kind of situations. To a certain extent, Sherlock Holmes, brilliant though that series is kind of almost dated and has become kind of somewhat somewhat what's the word, kind of like not pastiche, what's the word, a little bit
Yeah.
again a little bit
I
silly
right.
almost,
I would say that in spite of the Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman TV version, it is still something that for me is utterly synonymous with late Victorian London and can't be
Yes,
taken out
yeah.
of that.
But the idea of these impossible scenarios and trying to figure out all that kind of
Yeah.
can just seem a little bit silly. And I think modern detective series try to stay away from it. But you can have that in science fiction because you can
Yeah.
put your characters into an unbelievably weird situation, and it's completely right and proper there. For that
Yes.
to, you're not usually going to find in modern day in modern day terms, that a dead body in it trapped in a room where everything is, or the doors are locked, the windows are bolted, and there's I don't know, an orange pip in the corner or something weird like that's all going to become relevant and significant. Whereas in science fiction, you can't. So you can have a scenario where you're trying to communicate with an entire planet
Yes. Yeah.
that is sentient,
Yeah.
and that isn't weird because that's science fiction. So you're in that scenario, but then how do you deal with that, and how do you deal with it with that planet is in some kind of way infecting you, which again is it is you can't really do that in the real world kind of scenario, but you
Yeah,
can do it in science
absolutely.
fiction. So it allows you to then explore what is, and it sounds like this is what's happening with the protagonist here of kind of like how do you handle a situation like that, and what does it mean to be human in that kind of situation? I mean, like, it's very
Absolutely.
easy to sort
Yeah.
of say, oh, I've woken up next to my dead wife. Well, obviously that something fishy is going on here. But would you actually do that? Is that how you would really behave, or would you actually want to be clinging to that in some kind of way, even if you are aware that this is not this can't possibly be the real person, or perhaps even that maybe I have to read the book to find out. Even if maybe even you start to believe it almost is or could be, or or that something else is going on. And what do you do? What do you do in those unusual kind of circumstances? And that's what I think is fascinating about science fiction. If well written science fiction is actually still telling us something about us, as you say, it's not just in the case of this book, can bring something new to each new generation and
Yeah.
situation that they find themselves in, but just
Absolutely.
in general, as humans, we can look at it and kind of go, what's this telling me about me being me? In a sense, what would I do in this situation? What do people? Is this how people behave? And good science fiction, good fiction in general, will have you questioning that and going away. That's
Yeah,
really interesting.
I agreed. And Solaris, for me, did this in a way that very little other science fiction has ever done. Not a lot of other novels have ever done. So yeah,
Indeed.
it's definitely worth it. So what have you got for me
Well,
that you
mine's a
want to
real
pitch?
contrast, and I was somewhat inspired by our podcast with Nick Foster's book on ghost stories that we did.
Yeah.
And Nick, of course, has indie published his books, and we said then that he's an incredibly modest writer. and really shouldn't be because he's excellent. But it did remind me that I have another indie publication that
Right.
I read and reviewed some time ago, and I'll put the link to the review in the below this podcast when we're done. And it's got the wonderful title of The Spittle of Zimolax.
The Spittle of
The Spittle of
Zimolax. That
Zimolax, and
oh, I'm
it
hooked
should be bought.
already. Is
Should
that
be.
Is that Mr. Zimolax on the cover?
I think that is indeed, yes, the Zimalax, yes, itself, and it should be bought for no other reason than to have a book that has the title of Spittle in it.
Absolutely,
It may be a collection
spittle.
of one
Yes.
book. I wouldn't be surprised. And it's by a chap called Kirk Parsons, and I'll hold my hand up and say, actually, I went to school with Kirk. I haven't seen him since we were teenagers. It's a good 30 odd years since I last eyeballed him, as it were. But I'm aware of him, and he reads my books, and he just mentioned that he wrote this, and I went, oh, I'll go on, I'll read it. And to be honest, I mean, it was indie published. Kirk's done it all himself, and hasn't had much in the way of an editor or anything like that. So there are issues that I have with the presentation of the book. And I was expecting the writing to be probably, I mean, I know Kirk's a very intelligent chap, but I was expecting it to be, a bit hit and miss, because people who write their own books and don't get any editing advice and things like that, usually you're going to be looking at something, at best, you're looking at something that has promise, but it needs editing, it needs mentoring, and so on and so forth. I was astonished by the quality of this book. It was really quite remarkable, and it is in that kind of league of Nicholas Foster's kind of ability to write with great expertise and with wonderful research. I'll tell you just a little bit about it. I'll almost kind of read the blurb on the back pretty much. It's set in England in 1932, and it basically follows a German academic who has links to the Nazi Party, is visiting England, and the Department of Special Services want to know why, for obvious reasons. So they send in Sergeant Geraldine Chapman, who's a veteran of the Great War, and of course that now means she is a glorified filing clerk with the department. So the issues of sexism and such like is definitely one of the themes that runs in this book. And she's sent to Lichfield, where this chap is meant to be, to investigate. But very quickly it descends into a detective story to deal with murder, and the fact that there is a stolen statue that seems to be behind all the shenanigans going on around there. And so Jerry, as she's known, now faces a race against time. So it's to recover the statue, find the murderer before they can strike again, as well as trying to figure out what this German academic was actually doing in the first place. So it's a great kind of historical detective novel. It's a great
love those
from that kind of point of view. Really well researched. I wouldn't call myself an expert on the First World War, Second World War, and the span in between, but I have taught it academically for GCSE and A level to the level that goes to. So I've got a reasonably good knowledge of it, and this to me reads as absolutely authentic. The facts behind it seem bang on. Again, very much as Nicholas Foster did. Whatever is a complete lie has been well hidden by the truth, kind of thing. So, and that certainly is where we go here. Kirk's put a lot of work into this to make it work, but he's also just a really good writer. It's a cracking yarn. It's absolutely fantastic. And again, I won't give spoilers on this. I'll give a very obscure kind of reference to say that the ending goes completely left turn in the manner of a very famous, or in a similar manner to a very famous cracking movie from the 1980s. And that's literally, I'm going to keep it as obscure as that, because if I told you what the movie was, you'd be able to guess what kind of a left turn this takes. But it's okay. Think of great movies in the 1980s where you're following, you're enjoying it, and then at the end it's like, whoa, okay, I did not know that was coming in any way whatsoever. And that's what happens with the Spittle of Zimolax in exactly the same kind of way. And that just made it even better. It's not one of those novels where you kind of go, oh no, why have they done that? Oh no, no, that was not the direction. But far from it, you end up kind of go, oh, well, that's just genius, absolute genius.
Right. Well, I look forward to being able to pick up the movie reference. Well, not so much the movie references as see how the structure is preparing for that. I mean, I have to say, I'm sold on the idea of the quality of the research and the fact that it's baked into the novel to.
I think that makes all the difference, doesn't it? You can get writers who write very well, but their knowledge of the time or the country or the period or whatever like that is not sketchy at best kind of thing, and that really spoils it. When you've got something that just feels authentic, it makes all the difference.
That's the key, and I think there are three sort of levels to this. I think the one way you read something, oh, hang on, he or she has just got that horribly wrong. It wasn't that way. To, oh, what I'm reading here is the consciousness and mental landscape of somebody in 2025 pretending or trying to encounter the 1930s or the 15th century or the 19th century or whatever. And there's when it's done well, then it is absolutely baked into the bones of everything, and the consciousness and awareness and the approach, without having to resort to archaic language. And that is the real trick. I mean, I think it's okay to have expressions or references to things that were around then but obviously aren't now in quite the same way, or the words that referred to things in that way, particularly in dialogue. But I think doing the full-on language of the period is maybe a bridge too far and actually detracts, I sometimes think, from the end.
I think so, yes. If you're needing a glossary to understand what people are saying, it can be...
You need to suspend your disbelief.
Yes, yes. And indeed, that kind of comes back to the point of the importance of the good research, because what you want to be able to do is go into a book and stay in it. You want to stay in that world. You don't want to be having to pull out, either because you find yourself thinking, well, that's just not right, that wouldn't have happened or whatever like that, or because you're kind of going, I have no idea what they're saying any longer because they're using language that doesn't make too many obscure references to things that might have been relevant at the time, but I have no idea what they are now, and that just pulls you out. If you've got to reach for your phone to Google something, then it's probably not good.
I think that's not good. The other thing that strikes me is I assume that the statue is a MacGuffin of some sort, and that everybody is desperately trying to find it, or whoever has it doesn't know.
There is a race on. Yes, there's a race on to find
splendid.
it.
That is one of the great narrative devices.
Yes, it's definitely a classic. But yes, and the statue will remain important, shall we say, right the way through the story to the bitter end, as it were.
Yeah.
And it's quite dramatic. So yeah, so there you go. So I think what's great about this book, and what's useful about podcasts like this, is whilst we may Solaris is a great classic work that everybody knows, we're also able to pick up on books that have come our way that nobody else has ever heard of, whatever they're indie writers and things like that. And just as you can get great works that are awful, as in they've sold well and they're very famous, like let's just mention a number that's above 49 and below 51 and something to do with various different colors, for instance,
and all that,
and all that kind of stuff that aren't particularly necessarily good, kind of thing. And you can get famous books that are hit and miss in that sense. Likewise, you can do that with indie books, but the tradition is people tend to think that if it's indie published, it's probably not very good. But here we go with two really good books that are cracking,
real gems. Right. Well, if it is anything like the quality of Nicholas Foster's ghost stories, I certainly am looking forward already to reading about the Spittle, which I think I will take away as being its the way I will think about it, or just shorten it to the Spittle.
Well, yes, I think that it is the key word in that title. It's a genius of a title, absolutely. And from really my knowledge of Kirk, it's exactly the kind of thing that he would do, to just kind of like make people raise their eyebrows a little bit, and it's that is his kind of little joke that way. But it is important.
Right.
So yes,
I'm
all
hooked,
very good.
and I am really looking forward to seeing how he portrays um, a female detective in the 1930s,
He does
which
he
is
does very well.
just sufficiently unlikely and unusual to mean that you've instantly got a hook and a very good perspective, and you know that you're going to be seeing things through an interesting pair of eyes.
Indeed, just as you do with
Yeah.
your own book, I'll give you a little plug for your book,
Oh, thank you.
the Judas story, where
Yeah.
it's the same kind of idea, where you set your protagonist is a detective, isn't he? Effectively,
Effectively,
you
yeah,
know, in biblical times,
yeah.
in the time of Jesus, and yeah. Do we have any evidence that there were such things? I think there
Um,
isn't, isn't there?
I think there's a reasonable supposition that there was, but I don't think we
Right.
know. I don't think we know for certain.
Yeah. So
Uh,
there's so it's a great
it's a
little place to
step.
go in.
You've got to expand the horizons and step beyond what is known, because if you simply deal with what we know about a previous age, you are inevitably constraining your ability
Yeah.
to really thoroughly imagine and do it. Which isn't to say that you should then have license to go off and invent the implausible and the unlikely and the fantastic.
Yeah.
But
For instance, in
you have
biblical
to base
times,
it.
you would never find an alien spaceship swooping down to pick somebody up and carry them off. Oh, hang on a second, hang on.
Yes,
Got a feeling
I
someone
think
may have done that.
yes, I think somebody did do that. And no, it didn't really work. But there you go. There you go. Yeah.
Right,
Right.
and on that Monty Python-esque
Yeah.
note, we will finish it there.
Yeah.
Thank you if you've
Um,
joined us for this and stuck all the way through.
Indeed. Right.
And Nick, thank you very much for that. I'm going to press the stop button as
You're
soon as
very
I can.
welcome, Ken. Very
All
welcome.
right, here we
It's
go.
been
I'm
great,
going to press
as
it now.
ever. Cheers.